Hey, I'm Louis Gasparo. My tag is KR.One. I was born in Harlem. I moved to Astoria. I grew up in Astoria, Queens. My first noticing of graffiti came in about 1974. My older brother, would take me, my other brother, and my nephews to see the Yankees play at Shea Stadium. In 1974, the Yankees had all their home games at Shea Stadium. So I remember being on Queensboro Plaza, and a 7 train pulled by with it was a top to bottom whole car, although I didn't even know what that term was back then. It was just flying colors, polka dots, what I used to call marshmallow letters, because I couldn't read it, but they reminded me of big floating marshmallows. So I was instantly attracted to it. I even asked my brother, I go, what is that? And he's like, it's a bunch of punks with spray paint. Little did he know, 3 years later, I'd be one of those punks with spray paint. It really instantly hit me because it was huge. It was the whole train, and I was a little kid, so it was like, a cartoon flying right by me. And at the time, I was already an artist. I was drawing like Popeye and comic book stuff on paper and whatnot, painting in class at school. And so, I think that pushed me to just take to it immediately because it was so bold and colorful. I didn't know it was illegal or any of that stuff at the time. I just looked at the colors and the shapes, and I started to imitate the marshmallow letters by just doing shapes because I didn't know they were letters. So, fast forward to 77, when I started to see more of it and noticing it that it was letters and whatnot, my friend Mace, who lived a couple of blocks away from me, he started to show me photos of trains. And I'm like, what are you taking photos of trains for? And he goes, no, look on the train. And so I looked on the train and I saw 2 bubble letters, an MC, what we called a throw up. I said, what's that on the train? He goes, oh, that's called graffiti. So when he said, oh, that's graffiti, he put the name on top of what I was looking at and not knowing what it was. There was this guy, Don1. He had a crew, Mafia, Master's Administration for Incredible Artists. The thing about Don1 was he was not like what people thought of graffiti writers back then. He was a white boy. He was into rock and roll, heavy metal and whatnot, and he was dope. And he was from Astoria, which nobody at that time was hitting the double R's with style like Don. The double R's back then were basically a lot of throw-ups and tags. Well, and Don came around and he changed the whole thing because he was doing crazy styles and using crazy colors. And as a kid in Astoria, I used to go to junior high school 204. So what happened in 204 is the cutoff line from Astoria to Long Island City. So after school, I would take, some walks for urban, excavation or urban archaeology. And I started to notice Don1's tags in the neighborhood in Long Island City. I'd walk by myself and I would be like, wow, who is this guy? This guy can't be from Astoria. He's got to be from the Bronx because, back then the Bronx had the best writers, let's say. So, he became kind of like an enigmatic character to me. This is like, I actually seen 2 of Don1's pieces running. One I saw in 1976 right on my train station. At the time I wasn't writing it, I didn't know what it said, but I remembered that was the train I was looking at when he showed me his photos years later. So I became fascinated with who this person was because he was just outstanding to me. His tags had so much style. His pieces had so much style. So as I'm walking into Long Island City back then, I stumbled across what I call his practice schoolyard. It's on Crescent Street near Queensboro Plaza, and I just walked into the schoolyard, and everything from 1973 to at least 1977 that he did was in that schoolyard. I could just imagine him smoking weed and just doing pieces because it went from really, really simple style to his most elaborate work. I walked down a block even further and I made a left and I saw the double handball courts that he did. A silver, even though it's 2 colors, silver and black, I call it a burner because the style was just tremendous and it was taller than what a top to bottom on a train would be. So, what wound up happening is that I just had this vision in my head of who this guy must have been. And it turns out, years later, in 1986, I knew his brother from playing softball. And I asked him, I go, I know who your brother is, and he was the best. And so he gave me his number. So I called him on the phone in 86, and I told him, hey, I'm KR, I know who you are, you're Don1, you were the best, and I would love to do murals with you. I was doing murals in the neighborhood, getting paid, and I wanted to bring him on to give him money and collaborate with me. And turns out he lied to me. He told me, I have a degenerative bone disease. You sound like a nice kid, but I can't paint. So I remember taking the phone and doing one of these, and I said, hey, you were the best, thanks for the inspiration, and we didn't talk. It wasn't until with the advent of the internet, that I read a blurb about him on Subway Outlaws, and it had a story about him getting dosed at Studio 54. So I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I'm gonna locate this guy. And I asked a friend of mine who knew him and what his last name was. So I looked him up. He was in the phone book. I looked. I said, this has got to be him, because it was in the same area that I found out from other writers from Astoria that knew who he was. It was the location that they told me. I reached out, must have called him like 25 times. He finally answered the phone. And I reiterated to him who I was from 86, and he said he remembers. Turns out he had the note from 1986 that I gave his brother to give him. So he agreed to meet me, but I had to have telephone conversations with him, a telephone relationship, for about a year and a half before the actual meet happened, because he'd constantly cancel on me. But I was very persistent, and I met him in about 2003 or 4, something like that. And he didn't look the way I thought he was going to look. Like, when you have an image of someone and then you meet them and you're like, wow, I didn't think he looked like that. But I met him, and he let me in his house, and he showed me his archives, which I had no idea. He was a photography major at Art and Design High School. He showed me what Howard Carter found when he found King Tut. He showed me over 400 photos that were tremendous. And it wasn't only like the photos were of great graffiti, which they were, it was the composition of the photo as well, because he was majoring in photography at Art and Design High School. So, I just, once he suggested we should write a book, and I said, yeah, we gotta write one. And it took about 9 years from, that first mention of let's write a book to it actually happening. But what he meant to me was that, I used to tell him this, he was very unbelieving when I used to tell him how far his inspiration went. It wasn't only to me, he inspired Dean. Dean was an all-city bomber before he met Don1. He inspired Days. Days went on to be a world-renowned artist. He inspired so many people who, he inspired Dondi. I mean, really? There's only like maybe 2 people that could say that. Ups 2, Rappel, and Don1. So, I mean, to inspire a guy that went on to be this world-famous graffiti artist, it's like when people talk about Muhammad Ali, but they never ever mention Floyd Patterson. If Muhammad Ali didn't watch Floyd Patterson fight, his punching would have been different. It's the same thing with art. Rembrandt inspired whoever he inspired, and Don1 inspired who he did. To me, when I was growing up and I seen his pieces, they just stood out with style, with color. So, and he was from my neighborhood. He was like our Rocky or our whoever. He's from a mile away from my house, which at the time I had no idea that he lived there. By the time he quit, 77, 78 is kind of the time I started. So I never got to meet him. I only knew 2 people that knew him, Jace and KBTSS. They were the only ones in my whole neighborhood. But, like I say, it was, when I did meet him and I saw, his condition, I felt compelled that I had to bring some sort of light into this guy's life, because he was very, very inspiring, and he was a gentle person, very clean, very articulate, and he suffered a lot. And so I thought that, this, who I used to bring up all the time to all my friends and talk about Don1, this was the answer to show him what he did for some other kid, which was me. And I'm sure a lot of other people too, but I was the one that found him and did this for him, and that was my whole motivation, was to put some light into a life that was darkened by, you know, kind of a tragic mistake.
There used to be a movie out, it used to be called The Godfather, and, you know, everybody used to write that. So I used to write The Godfather, and one of my friends came up to me and said, "Hey, why don't you write what's short for it?" And he said, "Don." So I told him, "Yeah, Don sounds alright." So that's when I started hitting that.
Yo, Don1, Master's Administration for Incredible Artists, in front of the double R layups, all-time greatest double R king. I'm over here on 36th Avenue layups. This is the double R layups, man. Now, you know, I consider these guys to be my brothers. Like those guys, like from the Bronx, like Chain 3. He was badass. And Lee and the Fabulous Five crew, man. But the best for me was my brother Billy 167. Man, I was so upset when I found out that he passed, man. Billy 167, he inspired me, man. He had the connections and the colors, and, you know, he was in Mafia too, man, but they were more like my brothers, man. I didn't care about if people took my style, I took their style. It was all about, like, you know, brotherhood and artistry, man. I've been working on my patent. I got a U.S. patent for, I designed a ballerina slipper that wouldn't affect a ballerina's foot because it gets deformed. And I took my portfolio and I took my designs to Norma Kamali. You ever hear of Norma Kamali? She's a designer. So I go there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I go in and, you know, they said, "Oh, she'll be right out, she's in a meeting." Yo, you know what? Fuck fucking Norma. I was fucking waiting for her for like 9 hours, man. But they had me waiting in the lobby, and they told me that she was in a business meeting or something. So I wait. And I said, you know what? Fuck fucking Norma Kamali, man. You know, I said fuck her because I don't wait for nobody. Vice Squad. What do you mean Vice Squad? No, it was Hickey and Ski, man, and Roten and Wasserman, man. There was no Vice Squad when I was around. Plus, I never got caught anyway. I never got busted, man. I'm Don1. I don't get busted.
Oh, you quit why? Why? Yeah. Well, first, I'm 17.
Oh, you could get in trouble?
Yeah, I get fingerprinted and I get a record. I can't afford that.
Oh my God. How many trains do you think you paid it?
A lot of trains.
A lot of trains, man.
Yeah.